sort of a bloke was he? A good bloke, right? Or are we going to criticise him for the things we believe he should have done and could have done but didn't do? He did. But you see, we look on people's character and we see their perceived faults. We don't know everything that's happening, but we still criticise a person's character. Complaining is about, oh, it's too hot, it's too cold, I didn't get enough money out, I didn't put enough petrol in the car. That's complaining about things that are happening. And here today, we're dealing with criticism. And it's the criticism of Miriam and her brother Aaron. As we pick it up, the pretense exercise, Miriam and Aaron began to talk against Moses because of his Cushite wife. He married a Cushite. So as you read that, big deal? Would you make an issue out of that? People have and do. But I want us to notice that in our text, Miriam and Aaron are not discussing the situations or circumstances of the people of Israel. They're not discussing there is a meat shortage. They're not discussing the people getting all cranky because all they got was manna, or that they didn't have enough water. No, the topic of conversation was about their brother Moses. He was their brother. He was family. And as such, you would think that family stood up for one another, that they would protect one another, that they'd have one another's back. But here we find Miriam and Aaron criticising Moses' selection of a wife. They didn't agree with the choice. They probably thought, well, Moses, you could have done a lot better if you'd have chosen a Hebrew woman. This is what they were discussing, a topic of conversation. Now, many scholars have made an issue out of the fact that Moses had a Cushite wife. They debate whether she was Ethiopian or if it was Zipporah, who was a Midianite, whether Zipporah had died and Moses had taken a new wife, and whether it was right for him to do so. That was the topic of discussion. Now, in the Hebrew language, the noun Cush can mean Ethiopian. It can also refer to what is now Saudi Arabia, where Midian is located. The matter under discussion was Moses' wife, whether she was his second wife, whether she was black, whether she is his first wife from Midian. The inference, though, from the conversation is this: she was not suitable, she was not qualified to be the wife of Moses, who was the leader of God's people. That's what they were criticising him for. They were criticising his character. Their thought and thinking process was Moses should have known better. Actually, Moses could have done better. He could have asked them what they thought and saved himself a lot of embarrassment. Now, I think possibly Zipporah may have passed away by this time, and Moses had taken a new wife. And I do so because Miriam and Aaron would have met Zipporah and Moses' two sons long before this, and they would have been complaining or criticising Zipporah before this situation. But the fact that it's made that she's a Cushite wife. But what's the point of Miriam's criticism? Is it because Moses married a foreign woman and not a Hebrew woman? Was this actually forbidden? God told them not to marry unbelievers, in particular Canaanite women. It's thought that this woman came with the children of Israel when they left Egypt. So whatever her origins, she would be Hebrew. Zipporah was a Midianite, not a Hebrew. So I don't think that was the issue being discussed. It may have been a topic of conversation, but it's not the real issue and it's not the real problem. As the Hebrews left Egypt and as they traveled, they picked up many different nationalities who were integrated into the nation and were considered Hebrew. So according to the law given to Moses, this woman would have been a perfect fine choice for him to marry. So it wasn't really an issue. Now, were Miriam and Aaron really that upset about this issue? Or was there something else beneath this issue that was bugging both of them? And I think the issue about Moses' wife was simply a smokescreen to conceal the real reason for the criticism of Moses' character. The underlying issue was they were upset. They were fed up with Moses and all the attention that Moses was getting. All the speaking opportunities were going to Moses. Very little attention, very little opportunity was coming their way. So I believe the smokescreen was they were jealous and just used Moses' wife as an excuse to attack him. The proposition expressed, and this is the real issue. They said, is Moses the only one the Lord speaks through? Doesn't he also speak through us? And the Lord heard this. So the real issue had nothing to do about Moses' new wife. It was really against Moses himself. These two were not getting the recognition and power that was due them. In fact, they thought their brother was hogging all the attention. Now, they had not been in that position of leadership for very long to understand that you wouldn't want to change position with someone who's looking after 2 million people in the desert. You don't want all the hassles that go with it. But the issue for them was that God could speak through other people just as much as he was speaking through Moses. And their thinking was, well, God can speak through us too. He can give us a message to deliver to the people just as he has Moses. So the smokescreen was to hide or conceal their own hurts of being bypassed while their brother was getting all the accolades. And they didn't want people to see this. So they didn't want people to see they were jealous of their brother and resented him. That really was the issue. Now Miriam and Aaron were older than Moses. Now here is Moses in this tremendous place of leadership, and they are just his associates. Miriam was probably thinking, if it wasn't for me, Moses, you wouldn't even be alive. I was the one who was there when Pharaoh's daughter plucked you out of the river. I was the one who got you taken to our mother so she could care for you. That was Miriam's thinking. She's older than Moses. And then there was Aaron, probably thinking something like this. Why is Moses getting all the attention? I am the one who's doing all the talking. It was Moses himself who said he wasn't capable of handling the leadership role. So why should he be the one making all the decisions? See, jealousy does some strange things to people, even in families, of one another's gifts and abilities. That's why I say it pays to zip the lip. If we haven't got anything good to say about anyone, then what should we do? Say nothing. Criticism about perceived faults in others is dangerous and often pretty childish. The issue of Moses' new wife didn't really and wasn't much of a concern for either Miriam or Aaron. It didn't affect them. It didn't change the situation. It was an excuse to have a go at their brother without exposing themselves for what their ambitions were. They wanted a recognition that he was getting. So they made this an issue. The plan exposed. Now, Moses was very humble. He was the least proud person on earth. So the Lord suddenly spoke to Moses, Aaron, and Miriam, said, all three of you come to the meeting tent. So they went. The Lord came down in a pillar of cloud, stood at the entrance to the tent. He called to Aaron and Miriam, and they both came near. He said, listen to my words. When prophets are among you, I, the Lord, will show myself to them in visions. I will speak to them in dreams. But this is not true with my servant Moses. I trust him to lead all my people. I speak face to face with him, clearly, not with hidden meanings. He has even seen the form of the Lord. You should be afraid to speak against my servant Moses. The Lord was very angry with them, and he left. The problem with criticism about a person's character is that it often is a perceived fault. It's not really reality. Often it's not really true. Our text makes it clear that Moses wasn't on an ego trip. He wasn't on a power trip. He isn't being selfish. In fact, we're told he's being humble. For this, he is being attacked by those in his very family. The original language, Hebrew language, says it gives us the idea that Moses wouldn't assert or justify himself to this criticism. He would let it go, and he would let God take care of it, exactly what happened. Because God heard that criticism from Miriam. He heard that criticism from Aaron. So he steps in, and he acts with those who are bringing the criticism. We're told the Lord came down in a pillar of cloud. Now, it's never a good thing when God says, you. Takes me back to vivid memories of my boyhood in my family growing up. You, go to your room. You know what that meant, don't you? Something was going to happen. And so God summons these three, and he meets with them. And he comes down in a pillar of cloud, and he separates Miriam and Aaron from Moses. There's this observation. God's stand in the entry flap of the tent of meeting kept Aaron and Miriam from entering the tent where God met Moses to instruct and provide him direction. God's stand in the entry flap barred Aaron and Miriam from the leadership positions they coveted. So instead of being excited, instead of being involved in God's work, they were separated from God's will. So God, in our text, separates out those and exposes those who are causing trouble and stirring it up. God summons Aaron and Miriam. Aaron is there because he has been silent. Aaron needs to know where God stands. Moses stands before God, so they will act next time. Miriam is there because she's the one who made the actual complaints against Moses. And it's interesting, God defends Moses' character. He says, this is who Moses is. Now, God doesn't usually talk directly to men and women. He speaks to them indirectly in visions and dreams. But to Moses, he speaks face to face. And he does so on a regular basis. In other words, God and Moses had a very close relationship. He doesn't have that same close relationship with either Aaron or with Miriam. It wasn't there. So if I was to give you a very clear message, it's this: don't mess with God's chosen. God had chosen Moses for the purpose of leading the people. Don't criticize or mess with that. God will deal with them. For Aaron and Miriam, they were also chosen leaders. They were there among the people to lead. What we have here is God's contempt for how Miriam acted in her envy of Moses and her being set aside because of what God had given. Clearly, God had chosen to speak with Moses in a regular way. This was not something that was hidden. This was something that was done out in the open where everyone could see. God speaking to Moses wasn't a mystery. It wasn't a secret thing. So the question is, the whole nation sees God speaking to Moses on a regular basis. When do they see God speaking to Miriam? And how often do they see God speaking to Miriam? They don't. They don't. And God wanted to know why they were not afraid to criticize Moses, who is my servant, who is doing what I told him to do. You should be very afraid in your criticism of him. Now, I want us to understand, how old do you think Moses and Aaron and Miriam are at this stage? Are they spring chickens? You know, they're older than me, a lot older than me. Because here we have an artist's impression of the three of them. Do they look like spring chickens to you? No. I want us to focus on Miriam just for a moment and try and understand, why is Miriam unhappy with what she has? And why is she so aggrieved that she's got to find fault with her brother Moses? It was thought at this time Moses and Aaron were in their 80s and Miriam possibly close to 90 years of age. So they're not spring chickens. Probably in that age they were considered spring chickens because they lived a lot longer. The issue is, and I want us to understand this, Miriam was disappointed with God's plan for her life. She wanted more in her life. She looked at Moses and she wanted what Moses had. Even though she had been blessed by God throughout her life, it still wasn't enough for Miriam. In Micah 6:4, it says, I brought you up out of Egypt, redeemed you from the land of slavery. I sent Moses to lead you. Also, Aaron and Miriam. Miriam isn't just another Hebrew. She isn't just the sister. She's one of the three leaders of Israel. So she was blessed in her own right and her own way. In chapter 2, we remember she would have been about 7 or 8 years of age older, and 7 or 8 years older than Moses. But she is sharp. She has plenty of understanding. She watches the basket where Moses is floating down the river into the hand of Pharaoh's daughter. In Exodus 1:22, and Pharaoh gave this order to all his people, every boy that is born you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live. Moses' mother placed him in a basket in the Nile River in an attempt to save his life, and sent Miriam, her daughter, to watch that basket. The basket winds up in the hands of the daughter of Pharaoh. Miriam has enough sense, wits, to suggest her own mother as a nursemaid for her brother. Also, Miriam is described as a prophetess, the first one in all of Israel, and this would give her great authority among the people. In Exodus 15, we see this woman in action in her role as a prophetess. And if you've got your Bibles, you can mark it in Exodus 15, 19 to 21. It says, when Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and horsemen went into the sea, the Lord brought the waters of the sea back over them, but the Israelites walked through the sea on dry ground. Then Miriam the prophetess, Aaron's sister, took a tambourine in her hand, and all the women followed her with tambourines and dancing. Miriam sang to them, sing to the Lord, for he is highly exalted. The horse and its rider he has hurled into the sea. So this was a leader along with her brother, and she was not happy with what she had. Here we find her, a woman leading in song and dance, worshiping the Lord for saving them from certain death. So she is highly thought of among the people of Israel. They love her so much that we know, as we're going to find out, when she was stricken with the leprosy, they waited for her 7 days until she was healed and able to travel with them. In other words, God had blessed Miriam with so much in life. To this point in time, she's had a great life, a rich life, a blessed life. She'd been part of the leadership team. She'd been part of that team that nobody gave any chance of survival to in the desert. But she sees her brother and what he has, and it's what she wants. Now let's pay attention here. There is more than wanting the life that you see somebody else has, and we're guilty of this as well. We can look at other people and what they have, and we can be jealous of what they had. They might have a big mansion, they have the latest cars, they might have their own private jets that they fly through, and we can become jealous of what they have and forget about what we have already been blessed with.
We're already been blessed, but people work hard for the money.
It is. You see, she wants something more in life than what she had. And this really is an issue about overlooking what God has already given you. If I was to say it, count your blessings and name them one by one, and it will surprise you what the Lord has done. So often all we can see is what others have got and feel that we're missing out because we don't have the same opportunities as they do. But she's overlooking what God has given her. Not only does she covet her brother Moses, but she also ignores who she is. And she treats her gift in life as her life as irrelevant. It's not that she complains, but in a complaint, she's not satisfied, and she ridicules God for the blessings that he's already given her. Twice God reminded Miriam and Aaron Moses was his servant in verses 7 and 18. He was not their servant. He was not there to do their wishes or conform to their wishes. He was solely, wholly God's servant, doing exactly what God told him. So they had no right to criticize or complain about him. They had no valid reasons to justify their actions. Sure, Moses might have been a bit slow. He might have been a little bit cautious about doing things. But their perceived reasons didn't hold water. Now you notice Moses didn't do anything about his brothers and sisters, or sister, and their criticism. But God heard what they said. And it was God who intervened on their behalf. He confronted them about their view of their brother, and he corrected that view with the truth. Our text says God was angry with them, and then he left, but not before he punished Miriam for her impudence. In verses 9 through 12, when the cloud lifted from the tent and Aaron turned toward Miriam, she was as white as snow. She had a skin disease. Aaron said to Moses, "Please, my master, forgive us for our foolish sin. Don't let her be like a baby who is born dead. Sometimes a baby is born with half of its flesh eaten away." God left Miriam with a going away present. Not one that she asked for, not one that she wanted. It was called leprosy, which, if you like, served as a metaphor to describe sin in ancient Israel. It was a shocking disease which was contagious and ate away the body in which it was infected. Now, I find this ironic. What was Miriam's initial criticism about Moses in the first verse? She criticized him for his choice of a Cushite wife. In other words, someone who's dark-skinned, maybe even black. She was, if you like, a racist. But you notice what happens here? God's got a sense of humor. Because what happens for the punishment? Here she's been complaining about Moses taking a Cushite wife, and as punishment, her whole skin is as white as snow. Think about that for a minute. White as snow. She was also ostracized from among the people. In other words, she couldn't stay in with the people. She had to be put outside the camp. She was unclean. So she would have felt all eyes upon her as she left the camp. Other people couldn't come. She had to stay outside of the camp. You can imagine, as a leader, the contempt and ridicule by the people, because guess what? They cannot move until Miriam's healed. 7 days was the requirement. So 7 days, they had a reminder, and so did she, about what a criticism had got her. Now, it doesn't take long for Aaron to go to Moses, and I find that interesting. Aaron, instead of going to God and dropping on his face, he goes to Moses and asks him for help. He admits that what he's done is wrong. He and Miriam, it was stupid and short-sighted, it was a sin. So in other words, criticism is wrong. Is our criticism about something that is wrong or just what we think is wrong? And that's the challenge for us. Is it really about something that's wrong or what we suppose is wrong? Are we fixated on a fault? Are we always talking about it? Why is a critical attitude so wrong? It is wrong when it hurts our relationship with God. You'll notice Moses, what did Moses say that he and Miriam did him? They sinned. It wasn't a slip of the tongue. It wasn't a mistake. It was a sin. It was willful disobedience against God. And when we have a critical attitude towards a person, then you don't have time to think about God. You don't have time to think about his goodness because you're too caught up with a person's perceived faults and nothing else. As Philippians 4:8 says, brothers and sisters, think about the things that are good and worthy of praise. Think about the things that are true and honorable and right and pure, beautiful and respected. Think on these things, not on perceived faults. And lastly, the price extracted. So Moses cried out to the Lord, God, please heal her. The Lord answered Moses, if her father had spit in her face, she would have been shamed for 7 days. So put her outside the camp for 7 days. After that, she may come back. So Miriam was put outside the camp for 7 days, and the people did not move on until she came back. After that, the people left Hazeroth and camped in the desert of Paran. Now, one thing I noticed about Moses, he doesn't hold a grudge against her. He immediately pleads to God for her healing and restoration. Now, God says in verse 14, if Miriam had experienced a lesser shame, she would still have to be separated from the camp for a full week. So God intervenes in the criticism, and Miriam suffers. And it seems a harsh punishment for simply complaining or criticizing. But it's simply more than complaining. Miriam had been tremendously blessed by God. She had been given wisdom, talent, insight, more than the average person. She is also blessed to be one of the leaders of the people, leading right alongside with her brothers Moses and Aaron. What Miriam does is look past her blessing. She becomes jealous and envious of what God has given her brother Moses. And this is what God reacts to. Miriam presumes she is more than who she is, and so she's struck with leprosy. And being struck with leprosy was regarded as judgment from God. She's judged because of her actions. If Miriam's father had spit in her showing his contempt, she would have been an outcast for 7 days. Now, it's interesting here. The process of reconciliation and restoration, how long should it take? There is no time limit on really, but here, in this process of reconciliation and restoration, it takes time for a person to recognize the wrong that's been done. So not only the individual, but also those associated with it. In this case, the whole camp of Israel had to see and understand this was not acceptable. This is what happens when you complain against Moses' character. There is a price that has to be paid. There's no shortcuts. There's a price. There must be an effort that needs to be made. And in our text, Miriam pays the price in full. Think about it. 7 days of illness and isolation was what was required for Miriam to have an attitude change. Now we complain today, how long have you got to spend in isolation with COVID? 7 days. Now, how did you go when you're locked up for 7 days and you can't go anywhere? Didn't matter? Well, just remember, they didn't have TV, Netflix, or any of those things available to them. They didn't have aircon. They're stuck out in the desert 7 days. Gives you time for perspective. It times to get time to get an attitude adjustment, and this is what was happening. Now Miriam, because of her punishment, the people of Israel had to wait for her 7 days. They couldn't go anywhere because of Miriam's actions. Now, put yourself in Miriam's shoes. How do you think she's feeling at this stage, knowing that people can't do a thing because of her? I think she would have been embarrassed and felt ashamed. Not only from the leprosy, but she was the obstacle that was stopping them from going forward. She wasn't spared punishment. It was given. She became a leper. She experienced for herself the very same thing she criticized Moses. She experienced what it was like to be judged, ostracized, and excluded. Because that, in fact, is what she was doing to Moses' wife. She was picking on that or using it as an excuse. But you know what? Nowhere else in Scripture do we find that she caused any more problems for Moses. No more problems for Moses from that time. Do you think she got the lesson? She did. She was not heard from until her death. The next time her name came up in the wilderness wanderings was in the occasion of her burial in chapter 20, verse 1. Aaron, though, in the future, will learn to bear the brunt of people's rebellion with Moses, and he got a taste of his own medicine when he also almost had his priesthood stripped away from troublemakers. So what should I take from this lesson this morning? What will you take away from this lesson? Zip the lip. Get a grip on what you say about other people. Because to be honest, we do not know the full extent of what a person's experienced and going through until we're in their shoes. And it's easy for us to sit back from a distance and think, oh, that person, if they did this and this.